Hello and welcome to the Stormont Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormont and inside policymaking for Northern Ireland. I'm David McCann, and also on the podcast are Tim Cairns, who was a former special advisor to First Minister Peter Robinson and head of policy for the DUP. Hello, Tim.
Hi, David.
And we also have Micheal McKernan, who's a former special advisor to the SDLP. He has advised many ministers in many different departments. Micheal, welcome back to Stormont Sources.
Thank you. Hello, David. Hello, Tim.
Okay, on the podcast today, we're discussing the A5, a key £1.7 billion infrastructure project, which has been set back again this week after a judge ruled in favour of objectors. They say the development would impact targets set in the Climate Act of 2022. Why can't we build an essential road? And we'll also consider what Liz Kimmins, the infrastructure minister, should do next. Also today, the Speaker, Edwin Poots, wrote to MLAs last week, lamenting the quality of debate from MLAs in the chamber, complaining about the lack of engagement between representatives, about how they merely use statements for social media clips. We are asking, how can we improve the level of discourse in the Assembly? And finally, the race for the arse is getting underway as candidates emerge to replace President Michael D. Higgins when his term expires later this year. Two names from the North are in the frame: First Minister Michelle O'Neill and former SDLP leader Colum Eastwood. Are either of them credible candidates to be the next President of Ireland? You can watch it all on YouTube. Join the conversation. Search for Stormont Sources, where we upload clips and full episodes for you to enjoy. Head over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel there for videos and updates. You can also follow us on X, watch clips on TikTok and Instagram, and subscribe to our mailing list, stormontsources.com. You can also leave us a review on your podcast app, although we have to say if it's anything less than 4 stars, please don't bother. You can also drop us a WhatsApp, 0333 404 6507. Make sure to use the word Stormont. You can also drop us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. Let's start with another delay to the A5 project. The road is the Northern Ireland part of a major arterial route that connects the northwest of the island, so Donegal and Derry, to Dublin, via towns including Strabane, Omagh and Auchnacoy. For 20 years now, campaigners have called on this road to be upgraded due to safety concerns. More than 50 people have sadly died on this road over the past 20 years. Plans to upgrade the road were first announced all the way back in 2007. The road is seen by many as being a key part of connecting the west of Northern Ireland with Dublin and to help improve poor infrastructure in that part of the country. Earlier this week, Justice McAlinden ruled the construction of the project should not go ahead in its current form, saying that the Department of Infrastructure's plans do not comply with climate change targets. The Infrastructure Minister, Liz Kimmins, says that she is still committed to the road, arguing that when we go through the judgment, then we will work out what the next steps are. The DUP have blamed the parties who voted for the Climate Act in 2022 for its delay, and the SDLP opposition is proposing an amendment to the Act which could allow this project to go ahead. Micheal, I have to say, sometimes you wonder if MLAs pay any attention to the bills that they are passing.
No, I, to a large extent, would defend the politicians here. I think it's up to officials to recognise what needs to be done, what boxes need to be ticked for something to be judicial review proof. So I wouldn't start with the legislation, and I know the judge said that the legislation, the Northern Ireland Climate Act provisions weren't being complied with, and therefore the decision was unlawful. But he pointed to other things as well, an environmental impact directive and human rights points raised by the PAC. So there was a lot wrong with this procedurally, and we should remember that judicial review is simply, it's not a judge taking a view on whether the project's a good project or not. In fact, this judge went out of his way to say how important he thought the project was at the very end of his judgment, at the very end of his 100-page judgment. But the officials did not prepare the minister properly to go ahead with this. Now, maybe the minister overruled the officials and charged ahead anyway, but those boxes should have been ticked, and they weren't. The only people to blame for that are the department. I also think when it comes to judicial review, and I know it's a subject near to the DUP's heart and Tim's time, that our learned friends don't underreach when they go through a judicial review to find whether something is lawful or unlawful. And of course, they arrive at the correct conclusion, being the clever chaps that they are. judicial review has become a process where judges and protesters are marking the minister's homework down to the last dotted I and crossed T, and have they ticked every box. And if they fail in any aspect of procedure or process, which is so easy to do, then the thing can be declared unlawful. I experienced examples of this once when Alex Atwood took a decision to allow the demolition of the athletic stores, redevelopment of the athletic stores in central Belfast to go ahead. And I know that he considered every conceivable aspect. He visited the site several times, visited with people who were for the proposal, visited with people who were against the proposal, agonised on it, weighed up everything. And in the end, he was still judicially reviewed, and the judge said he hadn't considered everything. And I'll mention one more, Tim, or David.
Don't call me Tim, Michael. Jeepers.
Sorry about that. People will remember Jeff Rooker, over the Direct Rule Minister, Jeff Rooker, who once declared over the Sprucefield development, John Lewis, that it was a no-brainer. And then he got done over by the judge. How could anything be a no-brainer? It's not a no-brainer if you've considered every single aspect of the project in all of its detail. So that's where we are. I don't really blame Liz Kimmins. I blame, yes, a little bit our legislation, but mainly officialdom for not being prepared to have all the boxes ticked.
Yeah, I mean, Liz Kimmins was before the Infrastructure Committee today with her Permanent Secretary, and I'm nearly sure I heard John O'Dowd confirm the other day there was no ministerial directions issued or given on this. So, Tim, obviously, this is a key infrastructure. I mean, this is probably next to Casement for importance for Sinn Féin in particular in delivering this. Were you surprised with what the Justice McAlinden ruled on Monday?
Well, I think everybody was surprised from the point of view that the diggers have already been out building the road. So, I mean, it's interesting.
And that is, and just to build on what you're saying, Tim, that is a difference from what's happened before. So work alongside the land that's been acquired to make this happen has already started.
And I think the diggers were even there this morning, I heard in some radio reports. But and I think it is crucial what you've said there, because if the officials were to blame for this, it would have required a ministerial direction for those diggers to have gone onto the ground. If there has been no direction in this, then ministers were advised that this was legally compliant. Like, we can't build a road, we can't block a road either. I mean, we can't even put a bollard in Hill Street, never mind build a dual carriageway all the way to the border. I just despair of where our infrastructure is and where our infrastructure planning is. We just seem to be bungling, incompetent, overspending. I'm not blaming any particular political party for this. I mean, this is on Sinn Féin's watch. But the SDLP are coming forward and they're saying, oh, well, we need to put an amendment to the Climate Change Act. Well, who was the minister in the Department for Infrastructure when the Climate Act was passed? Now, I mean, who was that? I mean, they're no longer
me. I can answer.
Can you answer that, David? Goodness, give us the answer to that question.
Well, until May of 2022, I believe it was Nicola Mallon of the SDLP.
Nicola Mallon of the SDLP.
No, but this is sort of the usual descending into the petty finger pointing. No individual minister is responsible here. Every major project is subject not just to the Climate Change Act. If you fix the Climate Change Act, you haven't solved this problem. There are other areas where it's unlawful as well, environmental impact, human rights. But let me finish. For every project, you have to do an equality impact assessment, maybe a retail impact assessment, environmental impact. You have to follow the Habitats Directive. You may have to do a strategic environmental assessment. All of these things need done. Officialdom knows about them. We're subject to all of these rules, and you have to tick the boxes before you put forward a proposal that you know is going to be contested legally. That's just simple, straightforward. And it's not some individual minister's problem. It's systemic. Why do you think so many of our major projects run into the sand?
Well, I think that would be great, Michael, and a great defence of Nicola Mallon there. But I think that would be a viable defence of Nicola if it hadn't been pointed out at the time by those who opposed the bill that these were possibilities.
Well, then, if you want,
so she was warned.
Can I just for context, because again we're getting into the weeds here. So the Climate Act, when it was passed in 2022, it was voted for by Sinn Féin, SDLP, Alliance, obviously the Greens, I think the Ulster Unionists...
Ulster Unionists and DUP voted against.
Yes, Ulster Unionists and DUP voted against it. So it's just for context, listeners.
I think,
yeah.
for context.
Go ahead, Michael. Sorry,
as I've said, that's only part of the problem. If you amended the Climate Change Act, you don't get over this problem. There are problems with other aspects of it. But officialdom knows there are all of these hurdles have to be cleared for major projects, and they should prepare the project before it goes forward, that all of these things are done and all of these boxes are ticked. But if Tim wants to talk about bad legislation then leading to trouble in the courts later on, well, you need to look no further than the DUP's ministerial code given statutory effect, with the waffly woolly language of things that are controversial or cross-cutting or whatever have to get full executive approval, which would cover almost anything any minister wants to do. In particular, they took action over a planning application citing a major planning application citing the ministerial code, and then the judge found that every planning application would come under the ministerial code, and then they legislated to try and get rid of that little problem. But the problem still exists, that the badly written, badly conceived DUP ministerial code is causing problems to this day, because Jamie Bryson and people like that can challenge everything under the sun.
I think what Michael calls badly conceived legislation, whatever that violin rant was there from Michael, I know
normally it's you, Tim. Jesus, I was a bit surprised there.
But he was having a cheap pop at Nicola Mallet. Come on. There's a big systemic problem here in Northern Ireland. Order,
Okay, order, please. Can I call the Honourable Member for East Belfast?
We could have a podcast special about the very carefully constructed judicial reviews that were taken and passed, and the incremental, step-by-step judicial reviews alongside legislation that got us to 2001, and then perhaps the DUP and some of and Arlene Foster's time perhaps undid a little bit of that careful crafting. But that's for another podcast, and that's for a podcast special, because we really would be in the deep weeds of the nerd at that point. But the DUP, I think, and Michael's fair to say this, the DUP have used judicial reviews and used legislation to try and craft a position for where unionism can have recourse to law where they feel that controversial things have happened. But coming back to my point, look, I was not criticising just Nicola Mallet, but I do think it needs to be said it's a little bit rich for the SDLP to come now, when they were told at the time, when the climate bill was passed, that this would have knock-on problems for different aspects of not just infrastructure, but different aspects of life in Northern Ireland. They were warned, they were told, and then for them to come now as the opposition as if they didn't hold the ministry, as if this has all only just become apparent because of bungling on Sinn Féin's behalf. That is disingenuous, and it needs to be called out. Now, let's be fair, Nicola Mallet isn't the only minister who has got themselves into a situation like this, that we could point the finger at every political party, we could point the finger at every minister who's held office and things that they have done, but it does come back to a root problem. We do not seem to be able to get large infrastructure projects delivered. We don't seem to be able to build hospitals that don't rumble on for 10 years with contamination and water supplies and overspending, and the builders that we actually do employ are incompetent, and then we end up re-employing the same builders to do other projects. All of these things, we don't seem to learn from the past. We don't seem to learn from the mistakes of the past, and we fall into the same issues time and time again. 15 years to build a road. My goodness.
And the cost,
what a damning indictment.
And the other thing that was brought up at the Infrastructure Committee today, I think the first estimated cost of the A5 when it was originally proposed, I think it was around about £800 million, and now it's 1.7 billion. And this,
more, it's going to be more than 1.7
yeah,
billion.
I was going to say the cost will go up.
Everything overspends. We mess about and faff around with train stations. It overspends. We mess about and faff around with other road construction. It's overspending.
Our police and our world-class police and fire college, we wasted 40 or 50 million, then abandoned it. The one at Desert Crete. We have that crazy
children's hospitals.
The OMA schools project at Strew
Listen, Ellie.
has been running for 12 years, and none of the secondary schools are built yet. In fact, they should probably abandon that one too.
So lads, lads, can I just pose the question then? Is this road ever going to see the light of day? Is this upgrade ever going to see the light of day? Yeah,
it's going to be built. It will be built, and it'll be at a massive overspend, and it'll be years delayed. Countless tens of lives could have been saved if we had got our act together 15 years ago. And I really do feel for the families, because there are families who have suffered the loss of loved ones needlessly because of government incompetence. And that is an indictment on our society.
It is genuinely a very dangerous road, and it does need upgrades.
Yeah, Michael, you don't live massively far from it. In terms of where it is, I mean, it is in terms of the kind of a motive and the safety thing. There's also a massive economic argument for it as well, because of course the west of Northern Ireland, rightly in my view, points out that the road infrastructure is very, very poor, and this will open up not just Donegal and Strabane, but also Derry, and give it better connectivity to Dublin.
Yeah, I'm on that road quite often, and I mean, whatever about even the number of fatalities, which is shocking, the number of crashes, incidents, injuries, near things that happen. You see something hairy nearly every time you drive down that road. There are lorries trundling along. There are people trying to overtake where there's not room. There's a tractor pulling out of a side road. You know, it just is hazard after hazard, and it's terrible that they haven't advanced.
And look, I mean, we're not the only place with infrastructure issues. I mean, for example, on our sister podcast, I hear Jeff, Colum and Andy talk about, you know, the failure of the SNP government to dual some key roads outside of the Central Belt in Scotland as well. So infrastructure, just to be fair to our current guys, is not an issue. But Tim, I want to ask about the wider politics, because interesting, you've talked about, you know, kind of unionist kind of concerns, but I was just thinking about this, about, you know, Casement struggling to see how this gets done before 2027 or meaningfully progressed. The A5. Again, we could be literally going to the next Assembly election with the A5 somewhere still in the weeds if the judicial review goes wrong on Irish language signs. Those are the three key Sinn Féin projects that have been identified that have had no progress in 2027. I mean, that's what we could be conceivably looking at here. God, that's a real albatross around Sinn Féin's neck at the next Assembly election, no?
So what would Sinn Féin do about it? Are they going to go back into the Assembly? Is this a suspension issue? I mean, you tell me, David. I don't know.
Well, no,
I mean,
no. I'm just thinking about.
But you tell me. So, what does Sinn Féin do? So you answer the question for me, because I don't know the answer. I mean, if I was in Sinn Féin, I'd be considering should we even be part of the Northern Ireland Assembly, and I'd be considering suspension again. So you tell me.
Well, this is what you see. Suspension just compounds the problem, because
they can't really credibly blame political opponents for the lack of progress in these flagship projects. The executive has adopted them. The executive wants to do them. It's sheer incompetence that has stopped these being delivered. It's not Sinn Féin's political opponents.
No, it's not.
Would you advise, David?
Well, what I would advise, and look, I can say, and I remember sitting with you, Tim, the day the executive came back last time, by the way. We always have to preface this in Northern Ireland about whenever we recall executives coming back. But I remember, and we talked about, obviously, the ministerial portfolios had happened. And I remember saying to you, Tim, about the fact that I thought Sinn Féin were overcooking the Micheal as First Minister thing. I thought the more significant thing that happened that day were the DUP picks. The DUP taking education, taking communities. I thought it was very shrewd of the DUP. And you could see it caught Sinn Féin on the hop. You could see because they hadn't done the run through of the hunt that traditionally happens the day before. And I think what has happened now is that, you know, Michelle O'Neill is not John Swinney. Michelle O'Neill is not Leonard Morgan in Wales. It's not the same thing where John Swinney can pull a lever and his ministers have to respond. Leonard Morgan does the same thing and pulls a lever and their ministers have to respond. The First Minister of Northern Ireland is not like that. The First Minister of Northern Ireland does not command the government in the same way that other First Ministers or a Prime Minister.
One or two of them had to be told that.
Yeah, and they don't, and they don't do it. And I think the problem for Sinn Féin is that whenever I would never have had Michelle O'Neill utter the words, "Casement will be built on my watch," Why? Because you're giving yourself a hostage to fortune. It's not totally in Michelle O'Neill's control whether Casement gets built or not. So why would you create a rod for your own back? Same thing with the A5. You're just creating rods for your own back. It would be the equivalent of Emma Pengelly saying, we've got the communities portfolio, the DUP will build 9,000 homes within the next few years. Well, there's no point Emma Pengelly saying that because that's not totally in her control or her gift. And I think
what does Sinn Féin do about it?
Well, at this stage now, again, they've got time to turn this around. The problem is that when you've overcooked someone getting a position and these things don't move, that's a problem that I don't see how Sinn Féin do get out of it if we don't see meaningful progress. I mean, the A5, correct me if I'm wrong here, gents, because you two have been around more government construction projects, but what I'm right in thinking, if there's no real progress on them in the next 12 months, it's unlikely they will ever see any meaningful progress before the next Assembly election. Am I right in thinking that?
Necessarily. I mean, look, they've got to get the ducks in a row for the project so as it passes any other legal test or legal challenge, and then just get down to get it built. I wouldn't think that timing would be that prescriptive. I mean, this could be right up until the election because there's no legislation required. This is about getting plans in place, about getting assessments in place, about getting experts to agree. So it's not a legislative problem necessarily, although there might be a legislative solution to it. So no, it wouldn't be. You could see in 18 months' time the buildings the diggers start to roll out again.
Yeah, I mean they have built a stretch of it near Derry, which is Derry Dungiven, which is gives you a preview of what a better road might be like.
No, it does. You still haven't answered the question, David. What does Sinn Féin do? So we get to it's 2 or 3 months out from an election. Casement's not built. The road's not being progressed. There's no Irish language signs at the
I answered
station.
your question. Well, I answered your question in that I go back to my comments that I was making in 2024. I would not have cooked it as much about Michelle O'Neill becoming the first minister.
But it is cooked now. So you're advising
no, I know it is.
Now.
Well, Tim,
so what advice them now? What's your advice to them right now?
Well, my advice to them now is trying to find a way to get them built.
And what's the way?
Casement, we've discussed this on this podcast. Look, the grand bargain there has to be a reciprocal deal on football, alongside more executive investment in Casement, alongside football. I think that's how you partially unlock that on Casement. So
the A5's easier because I don't think there's massive unions.
No, there isn't. No, there is. And Deborah Erskine, who's
they're largely in favour.
Yeah, they're in. And Deborah Erskine, who's the chair of the infrastructure committee, DUP from Anna South Tyrone, she knows that road better than anyone else. She wants to see it built too. So look, there'll be no issue there. And there's those DUP MLAs in those western constituencies that want to see it built too.
So Irish language signs, that's not going to happen. That's going to be
Irish language signs will probably. But if they can get, I think if they get progress on 2 of the 3, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I think that'll be the case. The scenario I'm talking about is if we get to 2027 and none of them are moving ahead, like it's 3 for 3, none of them are moving ahead. That I think would cause some issue. But if
do you think there's a prospect of a Casement financial deal?
I think so. Yeah, I think. Look, you've said this and on this podcast, Tim, and other places. The solution to this. The political solution to this doesn't require a grand negotiation. It just requires you've got a Sinn Féin finance minister. You have also got a DP communities minister. John O'Dowd and Gordon Lyons need to cut a deal. The deal is obvious about what's there, what will satisfy the DP, and what will satisfy what Sinn Féin and GA are.
And the deal's sweetened probably by a little more money from Dublin and elsewhere.
Yeah, although I have to say though the British government have said no, and the Irish government didn't seem too keen to up there. Kind of the North-South Ministerial Council, they didn't seem too keen to that. But look, we've heard this before.
I think if you're a few million short, it'll be fine down the back of the sofa.
We'll see what happens. But anyway, well look. Here's hoping that the A5 is built because, again, there's not just an economic side to it. There's just a general safety side to it. And, Michael, you've talked about the realities of actually driving on that road too. So let's turn our attention now to a letter from the Speaker, Edwin Poots, to the MLAs. He's pretty scathing about the quality of debate of members in the chamber. He argues that if the Assembly is to be serious about its scrutiny role, having a strong culture of parliamentary debate is vital. He's lamented kind of basically the lack of cut and thrust in the chamber and the tendency to lean on pre-scripted remarks. Tim, you watch our chamber regularly. What do you make of this? Are you a fan of Poots reprimanding MLAs?
It's interesting, and I'm not saying that this was anything to do with us, but it is interesting this letter dropped just a couple of days after our conversation with Matthew O'Toole, where we discussed this, that the level of debate in the Assembly
Matthew had a pretty, for anyone who wants to go back, Matthew, about 3 weeks ago, Matthew had a clip on the thing that went viral, where he talked about, he was labelling Sinn Féin, saying that they don't debate, but you can go back and listen to that.
Don't be modest, chaps. Don't be modest. It was Stormont Sources what done it.
Well, it is interesting that we had that podcast and some of Matthew's clips went viral talking about this, and then the speaker came out with a letter, but I'm sure it was absolutely nothing to do with us. I'm sure the speaker doesn't listen to us at all, and why would I? But he's got letters to write, and in David's opinion, badly. So I think that, look, it's clear that the standard of debate in the Assembly is not what it should be. People are asking questions, going straight out of the chamber, clipping those, putting them up on social media. The matters of the day in the morning, that's all about social media fodder rather than really about meaningful engagement. I think that the problem that we've got, and this is just a problem in the Northern Ireland Assembly, this is a problem across legislatures across the Western world, actually. I think we've lost the ability with social media, we've lost the ability to listen. We don't listen anymore. We have our speech prepared. We have our remarks prepared. We have our questions prepared. In fact, I just saw last week the Labour whips. There was an email that was sent to all by Kim Leadbeater because I think she thought she was still sending out assisted dying information. And she's a whip for Labour. And she sent out suggested questions to backbenchers in the Labour Party to ask Labour Party ministers. So it goes on in Westminster as well. And Westminster's getting worse where people are reading their speeches, because in the past, people would sit in a debate in the chamber, whether it be Westminster, whether it be Stormont, wherever that was, and they would listen to the debate and what other people were saying and would come to a considered response of how to respond to that.
I never remember these days in the chamber from 99 onwards of these great debates. When did these debates happen?
Well, I can tell you, David, back when I started working in the Assembly in 2000, and I can tell you back then, there was not as much reading. There was not as many people during debates, particularly on legislation, who were coming in with pre-prepared speeches because there were a greater number of people who were in the House of Commons. It is still, and what's the House of Commons, because it's now breached in its entirety, but it is still against the convention of the House of Commons to read a speech. It used to be back in the day, if you read a speech, the whole Commons would start shouting, reading, and shout you down. That does not happen anymore. It was actually the election and the prominence of the SNP in Parliament that shifted things, because in Holyrood, people read. And now it's the norm in the House of Commons for people to read. And it is against the conventions of the House. So you had more people from across the political divide who were MPs, I think, back in 98, 99, 2000. And they knew the convention. You did not read speeches. Today, almost every speech, even on legislation, is read. And we've got this terrible situation where I've got a briefing from some charity or other, and I'm reading out the statistics in the Assembly. Somebody stands up 2 or 3 speeches after me and reads out exactly the same statistics. 2 or 3 speakers on read out exactly the same statistics. And it's like, didn't you just hear the person 2 or 3 speeches ago reading out those same statistics? You know, if you want to get those statistics in and endorse them, listen to what them said. You said, as the member for Upper Band said, there's 15% of people who are ... At least engage in the debate, at least show you're listening. And we've lost that in the House of Commons. We've lost that within the Assembly. We've lost that, I think, generally within the Western world. We don't listen because it's all about the YouTube clip. It's all about the clip on Twitter. It's all about TikTok. It's all about that wee moment of pre-prepared fame. And it is ruining debate at a political level. I actually think it's ruining interaction at a social level as well.
You've just outlined your approach to Stormont Sources there, Tim. I know you pay attention to the TikTok analytics on the. Well,
I love our TikTok. It is the best TikTok.
I like the comments underneath. I like the comments underneath some of your posts.
I think one of them said 3 absolute wastes of space or something. So I mean that guy obviously knows us.
Well, at least he can count.
Michael, What do you think of Edwin's letter? Are you lamenting the quality of
Well, I agree pretty much with most of what Tim said. I would say that Edwin has proven himself, having left such areas as producing climate change acts, to be quite an interesting speaker. He pulled people up about the dress code. Not that long ago, he told the members to smarten up a bit, and now he's telling them to smarten up in how they present their arguments. And he's absolutely right. It is embarrassing watching people reading out pre-prepared scripts that they haven't even written themselves, have been handed to them, and that take no account of anything that anyone else has said, and then they sit down or they run out and do something on social media to get themselves publicity. As Tim says, it's a problem here, but it's also a problem in the Commons. I remember you could watch the likes of Ken Clark or Michael Heseltine or even Neil Kinnock or John Smith produce great speeches that would make you change your mind on something just by the strength of their personality and passionate manner in which they express themselves. Now, the Assembly has had a few over time. I thought Peter Robinson was a great debater. I thought Sammy Wilson was pretty formidable if you're up against him. And then you have Jim Allister. Alex Atwood could be very forensic, particularly those debates that were not time limited. Alex could, from something maybe scribbled on the back of an envelope, he'd get 2 hours out of it. And on that point, I would say we can be a little bit harsh on the politicians because they're not all brilliant orators, and nor do they need to be. But they need to get away from this pre-prepared stuff and from ignoring what other people say. But I've nothing against somebody bringing in a few notes and using them to guide their speech. And then the other area is interventions. People should take interventions. The best, most confident Assembly performers will take an intervention, even if they know it's somebody who's going to have a bit of a pop at them or criticise their argument or whatever.
And respond to interventions as well.
But a skilled orator has the skill set to deal with any kind of intervention, either friendly or otherwise.
If I can just read out what Edwin Poots actually said about this. So in his letter, he said about technology has created the temptation for members to deliver pre-scripted text in the chamber shortly after which they leave to issue a clip of their speech on social media. If debate was only about a series of members reading out pre-scripted thoughts to an issue without interaction, there would be no need for an assembly chamber. We could do it by email.
One example there just recently, we mentioned in last week's podcast, the debate on Lough Neagh on the NAP, and you have speaker after speaker with a prepared speech which starts with, "I'm appalled by the pollution of Lough Neagh, and of course we must do everything we can to clean up our water, blah, blah, blah." And then they just go on to say why we mustn't do anything that would annoy the farming industry. Two positions that are completely contradictory, but the speaker after speaker produces a pre-prepared speech full of contradiction.
Although I have to say, though, the Assembly does change things to encourage that. I mean, for example, we've had the fairly recent introduction of member statements, which, for anyone who doesn't know, for 30 minutes at the start of every sitting day on Mondays and Tuesdays, MLAs get up to 3 minutes to read out whatever about an issue, about whatever they want. And it's basically, it's for everything from what's going on in Gaza to everything about what's going on in their local town. Now, I know MLAs will say to me, "Look, David, we should be able to note these things and we should have designated time to do this," but it just encourages the social media stuff.
Yeah, well, I don't know what Tim thinks, but I think those things are a wee bit sad, nearly. That, here you go, and you can try and ingratiate yourself with one lobby or another by saying something that will please them, and then put it out on social media. There's not a lot of substance in those, and not a lot of depth.
I mean, I think they were a great idea. When I first heard about it, I thought this is a great idea. But as you say, Michael, it's just become a TikTok. What we need is, I mean, I think what they were trying to model with those statements was like the adjournment debates in the House of Commons, and that was what we were trying, so you could bring up local issues. But people haven't done that. On many occasions, it's just absolute nonsense that's brought up, and you just wonder, what on earth are these people thinking, whittering on about that for 3 minutes?
Yeah, and I mean, because here's the thing. I know MLAs will say, well, it gives us a chance to do things that are a bit kind of more topical, but there are matters of the day procedures that you can bring in to do things like that. I mean, there are emergency questions procedures in the Assembly. Like Liz Kimmins answered on the A5 yesterday in the chamber because a urgent question was brought and she had to come and answer them.
I would limit those statements to something that touches on your constituency only. So it's a hyper-local issue. So you're going to get up and speak about a road that's got potholes that people are complaining to you about and you really want to raise. And then the minister has to respond to that. And it makes it a little more like an adjournment debate where you get drawn in a ballot and you have a little more opportunity to bring something local to the minister and have the minister say, why are they not fixing this? Why are they not doing this? Why is this not happening in your constituency? All this nonsense about, talking about global issues and all of that in these 3 minutes, that's just for YouTube virtue signal.
And another thing that happens, and Liz Kimmins actually called this out during the week when she was doing infrastructure questions, the amount of MLAs having full audible conversations during question times and ministerial statements. I mean, Liz Kimmins actually had to stop in the middle of a question and look around and say, Mr. Speaker, can we get this? And I think it was Edwin Poots had to say, yeah, look, there's...
Because of bench duty. So there has to be a quorum in the assembly. So a certain number of members are told you got to go in and sit, whether you want to be there or not. It's generally the members of the committee, and a couple of those members of the committees they don't really want to be part of that committee, so they're sitting there bored and they just chat to their mate. And you just hear hubbub and the conversation going on in the background. It's
the minister's answering questions and trying to. It goes back to that. It goes back to that not listening point as well. And then some MLAs complain about, ministers don't come and give us information. How many of them aren't even listening to the stuff? Anyway, God, we've been giving Stormont a bad write-up so far in the podcast. Do you know what? We need to get out of Northern Ireland and cast our net a little bit wider, and that's going to take us very nicely on to our third and final topic today. We're going to look south of the border now. So our final topic is looking at the race for the presidency of Ireland. This is starting to take shape. So voters in the Republic will go to the polls later this year to elect a new president once Michael D. Higgins' term expires in November. Higgins has been in office for 14 years and the race is wide open to replace him. Now, two names which have been mentioned, we may speculate on others in this segment, are from Northern Ireland are First Minister Michelle O'Neill and the former SDLP leader and current MP for Foyle, Colum Eastwood. O'Neill would have enough support from Sinn Féin to be a candidate, as they have more than 20 TDs, so that's a pretty straightforward process. However, she has not confirmed whether she will be a candidate. Worth noting that Martin McGuinness also ran for the presidency when he was Deputy First Minister in 2011. For Colum Eastwood, he would need to seek and get the nomination of Fianna Fáil, whose leader, Taoiseach Micheal Martin, seemed more than a little perplexed when he was asked about this on Friday at the North-South Ministerial Council, or he could seek the support of another party, such as Labour and the Social Democrats combined, who would have enough support to nominate him for the presidency. And this gives me a chance to throw in a fun fact. This would not be the first time a Northerner has run. Mary McAleese, of course, ran in 1997 for Fianna Fáil and won. Martin McGuinness, as I said earlier, stood in 2011, and also there's been a former SDLPer who's ran. Austin Curry, former SDLP minister, ran in 1990. We've even had Dana, I know you two are Eurovision nuts. She ran in 1997. All kinds of
everything.
And in 2011, for anyone who doesn't know Dana, she was the first person who won the Eurovision Song Contest for Ireland. And I went and researched that just for you two. Okay, Michael, I'm going to start with you on this because Colum Eastwood has kicked this off. He's just been re-elected for a second term as the member for Foyle. He has stood down for the leadership last summer. Why is he talking this up? Why is this happening? And this is actually, I've done some digging. Colum Eastwood is seriously considering this.
Yeah, well, I think Colum, for starters, is just demob happy. He's had 9 grueling years as leader. He's still only 42, so there's a lot of politics left in him, but I think he has a sense of release and he's letting loose a bit. I mean, he said something the other day about working with Sinn Féin that caused a few ripples. And so, I think he's serious about this. But I think if you look at the presidential election, look at the backdrop, the real runners and riders have yet to declare themselves. And one of the reasons is there is an anti-party sentiment in the South at the moment. It was reflected in the recent referenda where all the political parties recommended people vote one way and the people voted the other way, just to spite them almost.
And Michael, just to say, for the Irish presidency, that has been the case for many years. You think about Mary Robinson was associated with Labour, but she wasn't part of it. No one knew who Mary McAleese was before she ran in 97. And Michael D. Higgins was the same type of guy.
Yeah.
And you think about other people like Sean Gallagher who've been real contenders in the race.
So I think the three main parties, if you like, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin, are just not sure about putting... In the past, they'd put up their own candidate. They're just not sure about it. So if they can find somebody who's a bit like them, but not them, they might settle for that. Now, the front runner at the moment, funny enough, is Mairead McGuinness, who's Fine Gael, although she's detached physically by spent most of her career in Europe. But anyhow, no. So the thing is wide open. So in a wide open scenario, Eastwood could be a runner. He may find it difficult to get the nomination because Ivana Bacik, I think, behind the scenes wants to run. So that ties up Labour, Social Democrats and others. She's probably hoping that she could become the Sinn Féin-backed candidate as well, the candidate of the left. So that might close the door to Eastwood. Fine Gael will not give him a nomination. Sinn Féin won't give him a nomination. And Micheal Martin was surprisingly lukewarm on the subject, given their recent alliance and so on. So Colum Eastwood might find it difficult to get...
Don't mention the war, Michael.
He might find it difficult to get into the race. But if he does get into the race, I actually think he has a sporting chance, depending on who else is in it, because you'd be foolish to underestimate Eastwood. He was a councillor at 22, the youngest mayor of Derry, turned around a Westminster loss to recover it with a 17,000 majority. He overturned a strong incumbent to become leader of the party, took him on fairly early days. He's not afraid of a challenge. And when he gets into a situation where he has to perform, he's one of the best TV performers, TV debaters. So if he gets into the race, he's a serious runner.
No, and that is true. He is somebody. Although I have noted, though, I'm not sure how many people in the SDLP were consulted before he started floating this idea. I have picked up from different parts of the party that they were... The first they kind of saw about this was...
Well, I think that's part of this demob happy thing with Eastwood. He's had 9 years and he's just suddenly sprung free of responsibility. And he's kind of saying what he likes at the moment.
He only did get he did just get re-elected for a second term just less than a year ago for the MP for Foyle. But look, anyway, we'll come on. Tim, I bet the Irish presidency is an election you're looking forward to and paying close attention to. But what do you think?
I think we should say, David, because I've just received a tweet from Darren Marshall, the BBC producer. So the Red Lines podcast is now live. So I don't think there's any difficulty with us saying this. Myself and David were on the Red Lines podcast today, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And I was bored by David, Deirdre Heenan, and Suzanne Breen talking about the Irish presidential election. And the interesting thing, I think, was twofold. Myself and David ruled ourselves out of standing for the Irish presidential election.
No.
But one of the guests on the show did not, and that was Deirdre Heenan, and she refused to say, and you can listen to Red Lines.
For context, Tim, we should explain, people may not know who Deirdre Heenan is. She's a professor in social sciences at Ulster University, and again, the historical parallels here
she was pointing out...
Mary McAleese was a professor in Queen's before she became...
Well, she wasn't asked to point out the parallels between her and Mary McAleese. When Mark Carruthers pressed her, she was the one who volunteered. Oh, wouldn't it be interesting if a university professor from the north, who was from County Down and blah, blah, give all these parallels? Wouldn't it be interesting if somebody like that ran for president? And then Mark asks her, are you going to run or are you not? And she refuses to rule herself out. So there's obviously a third candidate, I think, that we need to discuss, because probably by the time this podcast dropped, might be news tomorrow that Deirdre Heenan...
No, it's a Stormont Sources scoop.
Well, I'm afraid I said it's a Red Line scoop, but so it might be news by the time you're listening to this that Deirdre Heenan is running. I think the Colum Eastwood story is really at the moment, and it may have legs down the line, but at the moment, it's really an issue that's in Colum Eastwood's head at the moment. I don't think there's anybody else.
Isn't it funny, although it's no longer the case, isn't it funny that the two of them, Deirdre Heenan and Colum Eastwood, were next door neighbours in Derry?
Well, it's funny because after the Red Lines podcast, I said to Deirdre Heenan about this and some other stuff, and she said, "Oh well, Colum was my next door neighbour." I'm kind of, what? And I said, so there you go. But Colum, I think at the moment, this is all in Colum's head. It may or may not come to pass. I think he's not overly keen on being an MP. I think he maybe likes being in London, and I think he's not seen around the constituency very often. He's not someone who seems to be very active in the
No,
constituency.
you can't say that. He's very dedicated to Derry and Foyle.
Well, I think others...
Wherever he may dally from time to time.
I think from what I've been told, the SDLP may well even be talking about succession planning for Colum, that they don't see him maybe even as the candidate for the next Westminster election. So clearly Colum's looking for something else. I mean, he said he was going to set up this All-Ireland Forum thing. Well, we haven't heard anything about
Commission,
that.
Tim,
New Ireland Commission.
You nearly got it right there.
Whatever it's called. I mean,
He has set it up.
Yes, but we never hear anything about it. I mean, I haven't heard anything about it. I haven't, heard a button or a tweet or anything about this commission. So he clearly left the leadership to do something, and then doesn't seem to have done anything. I think as far as Colum's concerned, this is something that this sits with Colum at the minute. As far as Michelle O'Neill is concerned, she'd been an interesting candidate. Martin McGuinness did this 10 years ago or so now.
Her numbers are strong in the Republic. Michelle O'Neill's approval rating in the Republic is quite high.
Her difficulty is if she won't do media in Northern Ireland, and she won't, she's absent in the media in Northern Ireland. If she won't sit down with Mark Carruthers and do a 15-minute interview and get through that, I don't know how she's going to survive down south, where she knows a lot less about the issues down there.
I think she actually is capable of getting through these interviews, and I have no idea why she doesn't do them, because she would probably perform quite well.
She may well be, but she hasn't proved herself.
I think the thing that would get her down south is you do come under tremendous scrutiny if you're running for the Áras. And that whole thing she was saying about there being no alternative to violence and all of that would be challenged.
I think 20 years ago that would have been a knock, Michael. I just think I think in modern Irish politics, I don't think that is as big a thing. I don't think. I mean, 20 years ago that would have disqualified you, Michael. I agree, but I just don't think that would be as big a thing.
Well, you still have guys like Michael McDowell running about. He might, if he could get a nomination, have a run at it. On Tim's point, that is incredible overconfidence on the part of the SDLP that they're already succession planning for Eastwood, knowing that he can't stay in the House of Commons if he's in Irish and Neutron.
Well, look, we'll wait and see. Although it would be the first time a member
I think what we need to
do,
actually, David, before we finish, is I've ruled out running for the Irish presidency. You've ruled out running for the Irish presidency. Michael, if the people of Ireland want you, are you going to run?
Of course, I have no natural personal interest in any office at all. But if it comes to pass that people prevail upon me in many different ways and in many different guises in this life, well, then I will have to consider every possibility to the fullest possible extent.
Well, look, lads, for succession planning, we should maybe get behind Eastwood or Michelle O'Neill, because either way, we get a by-election in Foyle if he gets elected, which means Stormont Sources can go to Foyle. Or if Michelle O'Neill gets in, new First Minister, we would. You're
just looking for the big BBC fiddies.
I'm just thinking ahead for us on the podcast, right, gents? That is good. We'll keep an eye on the presidential election, which we will come back to as the candidates get firmed up over the coming months as well. Now, you may know that Stormont Sources has a number of sister podcasts that cover the ins and outs of politics in Scotland and in England on a weekly basis, just like we do here for Northern Ireland. So on the Hollywood Sources podcast this week, taking you inside Scottish politics, a special episode. So Colum, Jeff and Andy join a sold-out live audience of 120, asking questions of the SNP leader, the Scottish First Minister, John Swinney, and the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sauer, in the battle for Bute House. So that's going to be released on Thursday, today, as you listen to this podcast. So make sure you go and check that out too. On the Whitehall Sources podcast, Colum, Kirsty and Joe look at an amendment signed by over 100 Labour MPs, which could kill the Labour government's welfare reform bill before it even starts. So will Keir Starmer be forced into another U-turn? So please make sure you check out the Hollywood Sources podcast and the Whitehall Sources podcast this week. They've got lots going on. And as for us, you can WhatsApp us as you're listening with questions and comments, ideally using a voice note so we can play it on next week's episode. We want to hear your comments on what we've said. You can WhatsApp us on 0333 404 6507. If WhatsApp's not your thing, you can send us an email, hello@stormontsources.com. That's all we have time for this edition of Stormont Sources. Thank you for listening in. Please keep in touch with your ideas, questions and comments. That's all from Tim, Michael and myself. We'll see you next week.